Hey guys, I'm going to be reading the next 3 chapters of George's Secret Key to the Universe. I apologize for the video being upside down yesterday. Hopefully it didn't bother you too much. I'll be recording it properly today, so my sincerest apologies. Felt like I was 100 years old recording that. The questions for the next 3 chapters will be on the Google Doc. Just check your email. If you already went to the Google Doc, it should already be saved in your Google Docs. All right, chapter 4. Eric walked toward the doorway and stuck his head out into the hallway. "Annie," he shouted up the stairs. "Yes," her distant voice tinkled down to them. "Do you want to come and see the birth and death of a star?" called Eric. "Seen it already," she sang back. "Lots of times." They heard her feet pattering down the stairs, and a second later she stuck her head around the door. "Can I have some potato chips?" "If we have any," replied Eric, "and if we do, you're to bring them into my library and share them with George, okay?" Annie smiled sweetly and disappeared into the kitchen. They heard the noise of cupboard doors being flung open. "Don't mind Annie," said Eric gently, without looking at George. "She doesn't mean any harm. She's just..." He trailed off and went over to the far corner of the room, where he started fiddling around with a computer George hadn't noticed before. He'd been too fascinated by the other objects to look at the flat silver screen with its keyboard attached. It was strange that George hadn't spotted the computer right away. He really wished he could persuade his mom and dad to buy him one. He was saving up his allowance for a computer, but at the current rate, he calculated it was going to take him about 8 years to afford even a really junky second-hand one. So instead, he had to use the clunky, slow old machines at school, which crashed every 5 minutes and had sticky fingerprints all over the screen. Eric's computer was small and glossy. It looked powerful and neat, the sort of computer you might find on a spaceship. Eric hit a couple of buttons on the keyboard, and the computer made a sort of humming noise while bright flashes of color shot across the screen. He patted the computer happily. "You have forgotten something," said a strange mechanical voice. George jumped out of his skin. "Have I?" Eric looked confused for a moment. "Yes," said the voice. "You have not introduced me." "I'm so sorry," exclaimed Eric. "George, this is Cosmos, my computer." George gulped. He had no idea what to say. "You have to say hello to Cosmos," said Eric in a side whisper to George. "Otherwise he'll get offended." "Hello, Cosmos," said George nervously. He'd never spoken to a computer before, and he didn't quite know where to look. "Hello, George," replied Cosmos. "Eric, you have forgotten something else." "What now?" said Eric. "You have not told George I am the most powerful computer in the world." Eric rolled his eyes up to heaven. "George," he said patiently, "Cosmos is the most powerful computer in the world." "That is correct," agreed Cosmos. "I am. In the future, there will be computers more powerful than me, but there are none in the past or present." "Sorry about this," Eric whispered to George. "Computers can be a bit touchy sometimes." "Am I smarter?" "I am smarter than Eric, too," boasted Cosmos. "Says who?" said Eric crossly, glaring at the screen. "Says me," said Cosmos. "I can compute billions of numbers in a nanosecond. In less time than it takes you to say Cosmos is great, I can compute the life of planets, of comets, of stars, and of galaxies. Before you can say Cosmos is the most impressive computer that I have ever seen, he is truly incredible, I can..." All right, said Eric. "Cosmos, you are the most impressive computer we have ever seen. Now, can we move on? I want to show George how a star is born." "No," said Cosmos. "No?" said Eric. "What do you mean, no, you ridiculous machine?" "I don't want to," said Cosmos snootily, "and I am not ridiculous. I am the most powerful computer that has ever been..." "Oh, but please," pleaded George, interrupting him. "Please, Cosmos, I really want to see how a star is born. Please, won't you show me?" Cosmos was silent. "Oh, come on," said Eric. "Let's show George some of the wonders of the universe." "Maybe," replied Cosmos sulkily. "George doesn't have a very high opinion of science," Eric went on. "So this is our chance, Cosmos, to show him how the other side of science." "He must take the oath," said Cosmos. "Good point, smart Cosmos," said Eric, leaping over to the blackboard. George turned and studied the writing on it. More closely, it looked like a poem. George, said Eric, do you want to learn about the greatest subject in the whole universe? Ah, yeah, exclaimed George. Are you prepared to take the oath to do so? To promise that you will use your knowledge only for good and not for evil? Eric was staring at George intently from behind his big glasses. His voice had changed. He now sounded extremely serious. This is very important, George. Science can be a force for good, but as you pointed out to me earlier, it can also do great harm. George stood up straighter and looked Eric in the eye. I am, he confirmed. Then, said Eric, look at the words on the blackboard. It is the oath of the scientist. If you agree with it, then read the oath out loud. George read what was written on the blackboard and thought about it for a moment. The words of the oath didn't frighten him. Instead, they made him feel tingly with excitement, right down to his toes. He read the oath out loud, as Eric instructed. I swear to use my scientific knowledge for the good of humanity. I promise never to harm any person in my search for enlightenment. The living room door opened and Annie sidled in, clutching a huge multi-pack bag of potato chips. Keep going, said Eric encouragingly. You're doing very well. George read the next part. I shall be courageous and careful in my quest for greater knowledge about the mysteries that surround us. I shall not use scientific knowledge for my own personal gain or give it to those who seek to destroy the wonderful planet on which we live. If I break this oath, may the beauty and wonder of the universe forever remain hidden from me. Eric clapped. Annie burst an empty potato chip bag. Cosmos flashed a rainbow of bright colors across his screen. Well done, George, said Eric. You are now a second youngest member of the Order of Scientific Inquiry for the Good of Humanity. I salute you, said Cosmos. From now on, I will recognize your command. And I'll let you have some chips, piped up Annie. Annie, shush, said Eric. We're just getting to the good part. George, you may now use the secret key that unlocks the universe. Can I? Asked George. Where is it? Go over to Cosmos, said Eric quietly, and look at his keyboard. Can you guess which one you need to press? Can you figure out which one is the secret key that will unlock the universe for you? Annie, say nothing. George did as he was told. Cosmos might be the world's most powerful computer, but his keyboard was just an ordinary, familiar one, with the letters and symbols laid out in the same order as even the school's crummiest computer. George thought hard. Which key would be the one to unlock the universe for him? He looked again at the keyboard, and suddenly he knew. It's this one, isn't it? He said to Eric, his finger hovering. Eric nodded. Press it, George, to begin. George's finger came down on the key marked Enter. Suddenly the lights in the room started to fade. Welcome, said Cosmos, playing a little computerized fanfare, to the universe. Chapter 5. The room was getting darker and darker. Come and sit here, George, called Annie, who had already settled herself on the big comfy sofa. George sat down next to her, and after a few seconds he saw a tiny beam of very bright white light. He came directly from Cosmo's screen. The beam shot out into the middle of the room, where it waved for a second before it began to sketch a shape into the air. It moved from left to right in a straight line before dropping down toward the floor. Leaving a shining path of light behind it, it turned another corner to make 3 sides of a rectangle. One more right angle, and the beam of light came back to its starting point. For a second, it looked like a flat shape hanging in the air, but suddenly it turned into something real and very familiar. But that looks like said George, who could suddenly see what it was. A window, said Eric proudly. Cosmos had made us use a window on the universe. Watch closely. The beam of light disappeared, leaving the window it had drawn in the middle of Eric's living room hanging in midair. Although the outline was still shining with bright light, it now looked exactly like a real window. It had a big sheet of glass in the pane and a metal frame. Beyond it there was a view, and that view was not of Eric's house or any houses, roads or towns or anywhere else that George had ever seen before. Instead, through the window, George could see an incredible vast darkness peppered with what looked like tiny bright stars. He started to try and count them. George, said Cosmos in his mechanical voice, there are billions and billions of stars in the universe. Unless you are as smart as me, you will not be able to count them all. Cosmos, why are there so many? Asked George in wonder. New stars are created all the time, answered the great computer. They are born in giant clouds of dust and gas. I'm going to show you how it happens. How long does it take for a star to be born? George asked. Tens of millions of years, replied Cosmos. I hope you are not in a hurry. Tut tut, said Eric, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the sofa, his long, thin limbs bent at sharp angles. He looked like a friendly giant spider. Don't worry, George. I've speeded it up quite a bit. You'll still get home for dinner. Annie passed the chips around. I don't know about you, George, but the universe always makes me very hungry. Oh dear, said Annie, sounding embarrassed. There was a rustling noise as she rooted around inside the big bag. I'd better get some more. She leaped off the sofa and dashed back into the kitchen. As Annie left the room, George noticed something about the view through the window out into outer space. Not all of it was covered with little stars. In the bottom corner of the window he saw a patch of total darkness, a place where not a single star shone. What happened there? He pointed. Let's have a look, shall we? Said Eric. He pressed a button on a remote control, and the view through the window seemed to zoom toward the dark patch. As they got closer, George realized that an enormous cloud was hovering in that spot. The window kept moving forward until they were right inside the cloud itself, and George could see it was made of gas and dust, just as Cosmos had said. What is that? He asked. And where is it? It's a huge cloud in outer space, much bigger than the ones in the sky, replied Eric, made up of tiny, tiny particles that are all floating around inside. There are so many of these particles that the cloud is enormous. It's so big that you could put millions and millions of Earths inside it. From this cloud, many stars will be born. Inside the cloud, George could see the particles moving around, some joining together to form huge lumps of matter. These great lumps spun around and around, gathering even more particles all the time. But as the particles joined together, the spinning lumps weren't getting bigger. Instead, they seemed to be getting smaller, as though something was squeezing them. It looked like someone was making gigantic dough balls in outer space. One of these giant balls was quite close to the window now, and George could see it spinning around, getting smaller all the time. As it shrank, it became hotter and hotter, so hot that George could feel the heat from where he sat on the sofa. And then it started to glow with dim but frightening light. Why is it glowing? Asked George. The more it shrinks, said Eric, the hotter it gets. The hotter it gets, the brighter it shines. Very soon it's going to get too hot. He grabbed a couple pairs of strange sunglasses from a pile of junk on the floor. Wear these, he told George, putting a pair on himself. It will soon be too bright for you to look at without glasses. Just as George put on the very dark glasses, the ball exploded from the inside, throwing off its outer layers and burning hot gas in all directions. After the explosion, the ball was shining like the sun. "Oh, wow," said George. "Is that the sun?" "It could be," replied Eric. "That's how stars are born. And that sun is a star. When a huge